All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Katie Soderberg. I work with both our sales and marketing team here at eOne Solutions, and we're excited to connect with you today. We really appreciate you taking some time out of your busy holiday season. This is a wild time of year. We understand that. Trying to close as much business as possible, finish out as many projects, and get really good outcomes for your customers. So we want to be really efficient with our time today and cover some topics that we know are important to you as partners. We've been to a lot of events this year. We've worked on a lot of things as a company and gotten a lot of feedback from you and from customers. And the topics that we have for today's Partner All Hands call are really based on some of the feedback that you guys had questions about. There's been some announcements really towards the end of Q3, early Q4 from Microsoft that we want to touch on. We've covered a lot in terms of migration scenarios, and this topic in terms of how eOne can help you deliver data migration and cover some of the more complex things. We've gotten a lot more questions as we have worked with more scenarios for our customers. We have customers who are looking ahead a couple years. We have customers who are migrating in the next month. We have customers, and especially with some of the announcements that from Microsoft for our GP customer base. We know that you as partners are trying to get your customers set up with a good timeline, and every customer is different. So there's some challenges that we know come up for customers, and we have our migration lead joining us here today, and he's going to touch on how eOne can help you with some of those scenarios. Another topic that we're going to cover is eOne and how we work with PowerAutomate, where we fit in relation to PowerAutomate. PowerAutomate is Microsoft's workflow automation tool that pairs with a lot of their business applications. And so we have a really good play with, and there's scenarios where, both solutions, really where eOne is a really good fit or a better fit. And there's scenarios where we highly recommend using PowerAutomate. So one of our technical experts, Rod O'Connor, is going to cover that topic today. You probably saw this. Probably a lot of you joined our release webinar a couple weeks ago, but we had a really big Popdock release in November, a really exciting release. It had a lot of good functionality and just makes the user experience there's a lot of things that were improved. There were a ton of bug fixes that were rolled out, and a lot of new connectors as well. So just with some of the changes, and we want to touch on some things that we want you to be aware of as a partner to just check with your customers. And we've have one of our technical specialists from our Popdock team joining us to cover that. And then finally, we'll wrap up with where eOne is going to be in the first half of this next year. We've got a busy event season in 2025 for some of the core channels we focus on, and so we'll touch on where we're going to be and where we can connect with you in person there. So with that, the first topic we want to touch on is some of the announcements that were made earlier this last quarter from Microsoft, and I'm going to turn it over to Martin Olson to talk through eOne's position on that.
Thanks, Katie. Throw my camera on here and say hello to everybody, and Merry Christmas. We're getting really close. So we had the first Christmas carols played in the office just yesterday, and I shut them down because it was too early. But to all those in the spirit, congratulations. 3,467 days is what eOne has promised to maintain our GP products. That's another 9.5 years from now. So have a think about that. Your GP customers are covered with SmartList Builder, with Extender, with Smart Connect, with FlexiCoder, with Node Builder for another 3,467 days. That takes me to, well, I shouldn't really give my age, but it'll take me to my early 60s, and like many of you, hopefully, hopefully we've got our feet up, doing something different by then. And GP has seen its course through 30 something years. I know many of you read the article I put on LinkedIn when the first GP announcement came. It's a massive impact to our business, and it's I'm sure a massive impact to many of your businesses. But I want to flip it around for you and say let's make it a challenge. It's a challenge to look after those customers that are on GP. It's a challenge to pivot our businesses to be where our market has gone, and to try and find a way for you and for us to ensure that your existing customers are still paying you and are still paying us in 10 years' time. So that's their transition. So for those that want to stay on GP for 10 years, 3,467 days. We've got their backs until then. And at that point, we'll probably carry on longer if there's still a big group of people. And that's okay. We're fine with that. If that's your choice, stick with it. For a large group of others, it's time to transition. We know that every one of those customers is looking at options. One, stay on GP. Two, make GP as good as they possibly can for the next 4, 5, 6, 7 years. The other group are looking at options. And what are they looking at? We know they're looking at NetSuite. We know they're looking at Acumatica. We know they're looking at Intact. And we know they're considering Business Central. All of them are viable options. Now, you get to guide your customer, and obviously the sensible Microsoft path is Business Central. We are there for that. We've rolled our products to hundreds of Business Central customers for people that are moving off GP. We've also rolled some customers into the NetSuite space where that's what they want to do. We've seen, I don't know, 30 or 40 customers roll into F&O. And so we've built our products to be there for them. So Smart Connect will work in those environments. Popdock will help with the migration, but also gives them that same familiar experience that they had with SmartList Builder when they land in their new environment. And I want to just touch on that really quickly. You can maybe jump to the next slide there, Katie. But the joy that we have by having a Popdock type product outside of Dexterity, outside of the GP environment, is fantastic. It means we can keep that up to date with exactly what's happening in the world. It's taken all the blinkers off, and we've been able to do amazing things. We've effectively rewritten the core product of Popdock 3 times in the last 4 years, because there's new stuff we can work with, there's new functionality, there's new key things we can do that we were never able to do in the GP space. So it's really exciting. And for those of you that haven't jumped on board with Popdock yet, take a look at it. Take a look at this new build. It's really quite fantastic. We're dabbling in things on the AI side, like how do we get data to people where they need it, and now we're looking at how we get data to bots where we need it. How do we get data to AI engines where you need it? And because we've built this tool that knows how to connect to your business data, ERP, CRM, support, etc., SQL, warehouses, lakes, we can grab that data contextually and get it to the people that need it in the app they like, but we can also pass it to things like AI, and that was never going to be possible with where we were with SmartList. So the world's opened up for us, which means the world's opened up for you. So if you haven't, watch this section a little bit later, reach out to your sales rep, and let's really get going on it, because I firmly believe there's not a single customer in your base on GP or any other product that doesn't need Popdock. I can sell it to every one of them, and if you can't, call me and we'll jump in and we'll do it, because they need it and they'll be amazed and they'll thank you for it, and it builds revenue, recurring revenue for you. The other thing the ask I have for you as partners, and I really thank you for supporting us through our pricing transitions. It's part of that big transition that you're making, that we've got to make, that our customers are making, and the support you've given us this year has been fantastic. My one ask of you is to have another look at those GP customers that are drifting, those GP customers that haven't got a plan, but have also decided that, you know what, it turns out the way Microsoft and eOne had this working, I don't need to pay AEP. I don't need to fund that anymore. And so they've stopped paying you, or they've stopped paying us. And then you can imagine it from our perspective. We've got 300 GP partners that sold our products. And if every one of them lost 3 customers this year that said, hey, we're moving off GP, or we're moving to NetSuite, and we don't care, we're moving somewhere else. There might be 3 customers for you. That turns into 900 customers for us if there was 3 for each. So it's something that I really want you to help us with, is let's engage with those lost customers, those that are drifting, those that have just stopped paying. Taking a product like Popdock to them and say, hey, we can make GP better. We can get your data to the cloud. There's all this cool stuff we can do. We can connect you with AI. We can put it on your cell phone and you can get access to the data you need across all the apps you've got. It's a really good story, and it means those customers are going to keep paying you, which is going to keep paying us. But to wrap up, we're here, 3,000, I'll say it again, 467.5 days is what we've got for these products. So we're here to support you. We're here to support your customers. And we've done a lot of work around our products to ensure we're here for every one of your customers, no matter what they choose over the next few years. So that's my message. If you want to discuss it further, it's one of my favorite topics right now. I'd love to chat with you about it. Send me a message. I think you've all got my email, and let's connect on it. So I'll throw back to the team. Thank you guys for joining today. Have a great Wednesday.
Awesome. Thank you, Martin. All right, now Ethan's going to jump in. Ethan's our migration lead at eOne. He is based out of our Copenhagen office, originally from Fargo, North Dakota. So Ethan, it's over to you.
Thank you, Katie. So as Katie said, I'm our migration lead, and I've actually been leading our internal team, task force, if you will, on migration for almost 4 years now. And we've been focused on migrating ERPs and now any other business application for a long time. So you may be starting this journey or starting to look at how you transition customers onto a new, mainly cloud-based platform, but we've been doing this for a very long time. Started out with just GP, as Martin alluded to, ways that we can move those GP customers to Business Central, NetSuite, and any other system. But this is now expanded out to being pretty agnostic to what system you're trying to onboard customers from. So it's not limited to just the GP scope. So what we wanted to do today was take a little bit of time to look at ERP migrations. We primarily stay focused on the data migration. So I wanted to take a step back here and look at the different types of data that you're going to work with in a migration. And I identified 3 main areas that you're going to need to worry about when you do the migration. And there's ways that you can use Popdock, Smart Connect, and the whole eOne iPaaS to help with each of these components. So the first one is your process migration. So this would be your user experience and application layers. So that's simple stuff that's going to need to migrate. It's the whole reason the customer's buying it. They want these new features. They want a completely cloud-based application, but they need to have their procure to pay, those sort of things. The data migration, this is eOne's bread and butter. We take care of your data no matter where you need it, serve it up to all of your users internally, help get it to those external users, making sure you stay compliant, all of that in the data section. And then finally, the most important one that kind of wraps it all together is your user migration, because no migration is going to be a success without strong user adoption. And that's only going to happen if the end users at your customers believe that you're providing a value by moving them to a new system. It can't just be, we want a shiny cloud app for the sake of having a shiny cloud app. We need to make sure that we're bringing new and better experiences to the user so that they adopt it and that they will continue to use it long after the migration is complete. So digging into these in a little bit more detail, I'm going to start with process migration. And there's different processes that you're going to be migrating when you move to a new system. You're going to be moving user processes, which are like how an end user accomplishes their task, how they go about doing their things every day. You have the workflow processes, those automated tasks that you don't have to do anything. It just happens and emails automatically send. And then we also have our integration and external systems. So there's a lot of processes that don't exist within one system today, and they may not exist within one system in the future, and you need to make sure that those are migrated successfully as well. So the first one is user processes. So user processes would be things like procure to pay, order to cash, logistics, recruitment, things that have a clear defined process. You might even have documents that your customers and users are providing saying, here's what I do every month for month end. These are my processes that I use to manage all of our expenses. Those processes are usually defined in a way that fit the system that they're in. So they might be using GP or another on-premise historical ERP today. And the way that that process works in that system may be different than the new system. Now, we can't just give them something new for the sake of giving them something new. It needs to make sense. It needs to be something that improves the end user's experience and provides an opportunity for them to adopt a new system and take it, be more productive in their day-to-day. The eOne advantage here, the way that we can help with those user processes is with Popdock, we can provide actionable insights. So you'll hear us say things about Popdock being actionable data a lot, but what we're really looking at here is with the user processes that we migrate, we're able to give the user the information they need to take action right away. So they might be looking up an expense report, but at the same time, they can see credit card transactions out of their Concur. They can see what attachments and receipts there were and pulling it from different sources that they can have a holistic idea of what they're doing without switching apps. And then those user processes may revolve around multiple applications. And so with Smart Connect, we're able to reduce that need for duplicate data entry. So today they may have all of it embedded in one system because they have GP and that GP application had a direct connection to their app. That may not be the case anymore, but by using Smart Connect, we can give them that same experience even after they do the migration. So it's not just short-term, but long-term enhancements for those user processes that they move through. We also have the workflow processes. So these ones would be your AP automation, marketing automation, depending on the systems that you're using, those things that are just going to happen in the background. And all of those are just going to be flowing without you having to intervene with them. If you do need to intervene, it's an easy reason to bring in Smart Connect, because if you don't have all of the data you need to automate these, then Smart Connect can bring that in. So we can bring in whatever that workflow, maybe you built a PowerAutomate flow, whatever it is that you built, Smart Connect can provide the data to really power those automations. Then you have all of your internal and external processes. And so those may be processes that revolve around lots of different applications. Could be a CRM system and warehouse management system. Maybe you're working with a 3PL. You can start to have these different applications that are ran by other teams internally or completely external teams. So we're going to be able to work with Popdock and Smart Connect to link up to those apps very quickly, providing the customer a quick win when they say, well, we really like working with this vendor. And you can say, that's fine. You can continue to work with that vendor. We're going to bring in Popdock and Smart Connect to bring that data into your new ERP very quickly and easily, helping you reduce the time to onboard this client and to make sure that you're a success because you have a unique offering that allows them to keep whatever their best of breed apps are. So I went through that a little fast because I wanted to make sure that we had time to focus on the data migration portion, because that's really where you're going to see a lot of conversation, particularly around Popdock and what we can do to bring those costs down. Data migration is the thing that a lot of customers get hung up on because they need their data for one reason or another. Maybe it's compliance, maybe it's audit history, forecasting trends, and it's crucial that they have that data today. But we want to look at how can we get them that data without it blowing the whole budget of the implementation. We're seeing partners delivering projects that are 200-300-hour projects just for the data migration. And a lot of our customers in the SMB space don't have a budget for that. So we're going to look at the data migration and what we can do with your master data, the data that you're transacting against, your open balances, the data that you're currently using that's in motion today, and then the historical data, the data that they might look at some point in the future. So for the master data, this is going to be your customers, contacts, vendors, things that you know you're going to need on day one. That customer is going to want to place an order. We need to make sure that the item is there so that they can purchase it. So these data points are essential to have in your new ERP. It can be challenging to bring them in because they vary across different systems, how they store them. So it might be called a customer in one system, it might be called a vendor or an item or a company in another. And the way that that data is structured, the way that it's related to different objects is different. So unifying that and having a strategy that allows you to clean the data, restructure it, and push it into the new system while having robust error handling is where you can really lean on Smart Connect, because as a full iPaaS and having all of that integration functionality, it plays very nice into a data migration. The other type that you're going to have that needs to be in that new system on day one is your open balances and active data. So this would be open, unpaid sales orders, open opportunities, things that are currently in motion today. These are going to be potentially the most risky data because we don't want to miss something. So someone's item doesn't get shipped because it doesn't come over, or we accidentally ship it twice because we didn't recognize that it already shipped once. So this is going to be very risky data, and it's going to potentially come from segregated sources. So maybe they've restructured the way their legal entities work. They have one subsidiary instead of 10. Maybe they have different applications and they're bringing in, migrating customers from completely different applications, like they're bringing in GP and NAV into one F&O. So it can be very challenging to bring all this data together and make sure it cuts over clean. And that's where Smart Connect is going to be really useful in pulling not only what data is open, but also checking the status of that and only bringing over what's relevant, only the unreceived lines, only the unshipped items, and make sure everything else is archived as historical. So that leads into historical data, and this is the part that is going to blow your budget if you don't have a plan for how to migrate a customer's history. Depending on where you are in the world, in your industry, there's going to be different requirements of what historical data looks like. So here in EMEA, I work a lot with our UK customers who have requirements for 7 years of history to be saved. Now, there isn't strict requirements on where that data needs to be. They just need to be able to provide that if they get audited at any time. So they can store that data wherever they want, but what we provide with eOne is the option to access that easily. So this would be your big tables, your ledger tables, historical transaction tables, attachments, audit history. It's really expensive data because it's complex. So you're talking potentially terabytes of data that we've had to migrate from historical applications. And then that data has relationships to your active data. So you want to make sure that we're having this preserved in a way that you can access it at any time. And it's easily accessible in the application that you've moved to without migrating it and dealing with outdated data that's referenced by the historical data. So with Popdock and the Popdock Data Lake upload tool, which I hope you have all seen up to this point. If you haven't, definitely reach out after this. We're able to take that entire database from any SQL database that it's stored in today and archive it to a data lake. So that's an easy win for you no matter what they're moving from. So it might be GP, it might be NAV, it may be Sage, it may be whatever that application is. It's a simple answer to say we can preserve that entire database. You don't need to make decisions right now. We're going to save it. It's secure in a data lake, no questions asked. And the last section is your users. And these are going to be the most essential. The only way that you're going to have a successful migration is if it's user adoption. And this is from the top down. It's not just about getting the CFO on board. It's getting everyone from accounts payable. It's getting the warehouse team. It's getting everyone on board with this migration. So we'd be talking about the general users, the seats that you're selling in Business Central or NetSuite, but it would also be the temporary or external users, the users that are dependent on the system that you're implementing. So this would be your 3PL users, these users in another warehouse that's external. There's going to be users both internally and externally that need success from your migration. So the first one would be your general users that are in the new ERP. And these would be, could be an account manager, procurement manager, the IT team, just anyone that has a seat in this application. And they need to adopt it, and they need to be trained, and they need to know what that experience looks like. It's hard to ask them questions about, do you want it to look like this? Because they don't know what the system looks like. So one of the biggest challenges of migrating these users is they don't know what a successful migration is going to look like. So you have to join them on that journey, give them some visualization, and show them exactly what it would look like when it's complete. So a lot of our partners have been adopting Popdock as a strategy here, where your demo environment that you're using for a customer that you're going to migrate already has Popdock there, showing some sample data from GP. That's something that can be configured in less than an hour, giving you the ability to quickly say, oh, you have GP data, it doesn't matter, it's right here. Oh, you have nav data, it's right here. You have that built into your standard demo scenario. It's going to be an easy win, and the customer doesn't need to know that it's another add-on. What they're seeing is a solution that meets what their need is, because they know on day one, I'm going to need to know what I sold my customer 10 years ago. It happens to me every day. You want to be able to give those quick wins using Popdock. And then the final one is your temporary and external users. So these would be users from any application. So these would be potentially users connected via an EDI connection. They could be consultants from your company or from other IT departments. It could be a seasonal warehouse user that comes and goes. And these typically have high turnover, and they're really need quick onboarding. So we want to make things as painless as possible for these types of users that aren't going to stick around forever. And one of the ways that we can do that is with Smart Connect and a little bit of Popdock to bring external apps data in and out. So we're not going to require these users to learn a big ERP with a lot of depth and functionality. We're going to give them access to it in what app makes sense to them. So if they need a simple pick, pack, and ship solution, you can go and grab one of those off the shelf. Smart Connect will connect up to that, and then they can get onboarded in an app that's designed for their simple, small use case without needing to learn everything about the ERP or be given more tools than they need to learn and to onboard. So there's a lot of ways that you can fit Smart Connect and Popdock into a migration, but I think that these are just good bullet points to keep in your head while you're talking to a new prospect about beginning their migration journey and making sure that they can visualize what this is going to look like for them and it's unique to their scenario, and that you have that flexibility with the eOne iPaaS. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Rod to take it away on another very common scenario that we hear in our sales cycle on PowerAutomate and eOne.
Sounds good. Thanks, Ethan, and good morning, everyone. Maybe good afternoon, depending where you're at. Any of you who have heard me talk before have heard me say a whole lot of times that you can't do everything with a single tool. There's no one tool that can do everything. And that even applies when you start to think about different types of the same tool. So I always talk about saws, and, if you do any kind of building or DIY stuff or carpentry or anything, you probably own a whole bunch of different saws. I took a count out in my garage, and I've actually got 8 different types of saws, and I don't even do any real carpentry. I'm just, the guy that fixes stuff around the house. So I'm often questioning, can I do something like build a table with a single saw? And if you look around on the internet, it turns out the answer is kind of. So there's all these guys out there, it's mostly guys for some reason, that are these chainsaw experts, and they can build really cool tables using just a chainsaw, right? So tables like this one that we're showing you here, they're all over TikTok, Instagram, all the different socials, and they've even got YouTube videos out there showing you how you too could build this really cool table with nothing but a chainsaw. Maybe with a ton of practice you can, I don't know. My guess is that these guys are selling a whole bunch of these tables to people who did try to do it and just couldn't get it done. It is a cool looking table. It's obviously functional, but it's not the most elegant table. Your mother wouldn't put this in the for company only dining room. So to make the dining room table, you're going to need a whole bunch of different saws. You need a circular saws for the rough cuts, a scroll saw for the curves, miter saws for the angles. There's probably more, honestly, but as I mentioned, I'm no carpenter, so I'm not sure what exactly you need to make a table. The whole point here is there's a bunch of PowerAutomate experts out there too, and a lot of them will tell you that it's the only tool that they need or they use, and they do some really cool stuff. Like I've watched the videos and they do good work, but the vast majority of the partners that I'm talking to, they're telling me that there are limitations with PowerAutomate. Once you start to get into more complex projects, you start to have to look at other tools. So before we start to identify the types of tools that are required, we need to quickly clarify what I'm talking about between process automation and workflow automation. I did turn to AI to get some clarification for myself, so that's where some of these points are coming from. Basically, a workflow is a specific stage in an overall business process. So if you think about some examples of this, there's going to be approval processes, maybe creating folders or documents automatically, maybe provisioning licensing for new users. So different specific tasks that you can automate using workflow automation. But when you start to combine these tasks together, these workflows, you get into an overall business process. So usually a business process will involve multiple workflows and span multiple systems. Some good examples, Ethan talked earlier about order to invoice or procure to pay, maybe the new onboarding process. I mentioned before provisioning licensing for the users, but that's not the only thing you have to do when you are onboarding a new user. You got to add them to payroll, add them to the travel and expense solution. You need to get them all of their licensing, maybe add them to your company benefits. There's a whole bunch of steps to onboarding that customer, and it becomes a really listen to me, that user, and it becomes really, really complex. And when you get that level of complexity, now you start to outgrow PowerAutomate. So as I mentioned, I think I've made my opinion clear here. PowerAutomate does a lot of really, really cool things, and it's a really simple tool for folks to pick up and learn, but it's designed as a workflow automation tool. So the interface is intended for average users, and it's really designed to automate simple processes. Once again, I know there are experts out there that are using PowerAutomate to do pretty much everything, but again, most of the partners I'm talking to say that the complexities of a process automation usually drive them to something else. So some of the examples of what do they mean by complexity, if I've got multiple sources, I've got multiple targets, maybe I've got large amounts or complex data transformation. There's also cases where some of the connectors, especially the non-Microsoft ones, are missing required triggers. So, I need to trigger based off of something and it just isn't there in PowerAutomate, or maybe I'm missing some fields. So some of the partners who have developers on staff are using Logic Apps and Functions, Azure Logic Apps and Azure Functions, when they need to get into a more robust solution. So where PowerAutomate is designed for less technical people, Azure Logic Apps and Functions, very much developer tools. So they do bring all the flexibility and reliability that you'd expect from an integration development platform, but it definitely comes with a cost associated with it. The development projects themselves tend to be pretty expensive. One of the partners I spoke to said that a project like this that's using Azure Logic Apps and Functions, they usually say it's going to be around $250,000 for that project. Then the licensing is consumption-based, so it is hard to estimate. But I've talked to people and I'm seeing projects that are anywhere from a couple $100 a month up to $4,500 for a single process. So that's getting pretty expensive. So if you don't have a development team, or maybe you have a customer who can't or won't pay the types of fees that come with those projects, what do you do? And that's where we come into play with our iPaaS solutions. So Smart Connect is obviously able to automate complex processes. We've got reliable connectors. They're complete in so far as they can be. And that's including all of the non-Microsoft ones as well. So I know a lot of folks are Microsoft partners, and we tend to talk a lot about Microsoft, but we're out there in Salesforce and NetSuite and all kinds of other spaces as well. So the integration processes can be strung together or they can be executed in tandem, so you can really start to deal with timing and complexity there. We have lots of no-code data transformations available, especially specific to individual connectors. For example, if it's CE or Salesforce, we're going to have things like pick list lookups. All of these are no-code solutions. We do have code-based calculations available out there as well. So if you need something a little bit more complex, or honestly, if you just like to write code, that is available there as well. And for the purposes of this presentation, whether you're running Smart Connect in the cloud or on-premise, which we still support both, we have our own REST API. So this means that you can call the Smart Connect process directly from PowerAutomate. So, at the end of that approval workflow, which PowerAutomate does really well, at the point where you may have had to jump into an Azure Logic app or an Azure function to get the next step done, this is where you could call Smart Connect. Smart Connect can also trigger PowerAutomate flows directly as a task as well. I've done demos of that in the past on this call, and we have a couple of videos out there if you'd like to see them. With examples of this, but so if at the end, as part of this complex process automation, I need an approval process or to create some files on SharePoint or something along those lines, now I can call out to that PowerAutomate process, and now I'm able to handle all of that complexity that I need. And honestly, where our projects are much smaller than an Azure Logic App / function project. So, overall, we tend to be less expensive, and our licensing is reasonable as well. And then a lot of folks don't really realize Popdock is just as important an iPaaS tool as Smart Connect. So we're using Popdock widgets to give users access to data. You heard Ethan use the words actionable insights. We're able to allow people to interact with that data when it's embedded in the system they're choosing to work in. Again, if you've ever seen a demo of Popdock, you've seen a widget. It's one of my favorite features in Popdock. But with those actions that we talked about, you can also trigger a PowerAutomate flow. So you could kick off that approval, you could create that file, whatever it is that you're using PowerAutomate for, you can also kick that off directly from Popdock. So as I said before, it's not an either or situation when you're out there in the wild. You're going to be most likely using both PowerAutomate and Smart Connect and Popdock, and you're going to be solving the world's problems for your customers. And speaking of Popdock, I am going to hand things off to Tyler at this point, who is going to talk to us about that major release we put out last month.
Awesome. Thanks, Rod, and a good morning or afternoon to everyone, and thanks for joining the call. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time just talking about the Popdock release. As many of you are aware, if not all of you are aware, Popdock had a major release that went out in November, on November 9th. The release included a ton of different product updates, including a completely updated Popdock UI in addition to new features. new connectors and also a bunch of different bug fixes. I wanted to highlight a couple of the areas that the team, spent some time on in this release. That included, both improvements and potential changes, in the hopes that you guys can go out and spend some time familiarizing yourself with these areas, so that when your customers are getting started with Popdock, or if you have current customers using Popdock, you are aware of what's changed and how you can assist them. So the first big section is around security. So the security model inside of Popdock was really updated within this last release, and it's gotten a lot more granular. We've essentially given customers a lot more control in terms of not only what data can their users see, but what can they do with that data. And where it all starts is by introducing kind of new roles. So we have now both user roles and connector roles inside of Popdock. User roles they essentially define the permissions or resources that can be added, updated, or deleted in Popdock. So these roles will essentially give you access to the areas of Popdock that are not specific to a connector. So for example, things like widgets, and also schedules. Connector roles, on the other hand, are used to control access to data within a connector. So these roles determine who can view what data within a connector and what permissions that they have for adding, updating, or deleting resources that are tied to that connector. The big thing to note, however, is that when assigning connector roles, is they're actually specific to whichever connector that those roles are tied to, which means that a user in Popdock has the option of having different levels of roles that are tied to different connectors. So for instance, you might have a user who might just be able to see data coming from their ERP connector, so Business Central or Dynamics GP, but they might have more connector roles available for a CRM connector like D365 Sales or Salesforce, where they might have the ability to add new lists or modify existing lists. So the introduction of these connector roles ultimately allows customers to get very granular with what they want to give their end users the ability to do inside of Popdock. Now, one of the big user roles that I wanted to call out is the security administrator role. So a lot of people, one of the big changes in this release is we no longer have just a regular administrator role. So the security administrator role the user role has become a very important role. The role gives you the ability to add users, so inviting users, and then also create teams, and then assign security resources to both those users and teams. So when a Popdock account gets created, the first user in the account will now be given this security administrator role by default, and they from there have the ability to assign additional security to any users that they invite, and then break down the security for those users. This becomes a really important role because not only do you need this role to invite new users to the Popdock web application, but it also is a role needed to essentially dictate what other users can do inside of the application as well. Which then kind of leads me to our next section here, is creating teams. This is going to probably be something you'll be hearing a lot from the Popdock team as kind of a recommendation going forward with regards to security, is setting up teams inside of Popdock. So rather than having to assign security on a user by user basis, you essentially can instead create a team, assign security roles to that team, and then from there decide which users are appropriate to be added to that team. So this becomes a really nice time saver when working with security. So if you have a handful of users that should have the same level of permissions and should be able to do the same things with data from within connectors, rather than granting that security on a user basis, you can just add them to the team once it's been set up. And in the event they were to leave the company, you can just remove them from that team and they would no longer have that security access. The last thing that I wanted to quickly highlight is another new feature with regards to security, and that's firewalls and virtual networks. This is new feature essentially allows you to create a firewall to restrict access and lock down either the Popdock web application, our Popdock API, or widgets in general, or I guess individual widgets to a specific IP address or a range of IP addresses. So again, this is just another feature giving customers more control in terms of who is accessing data via Popdock resources and also where from. The next area that I wanted to spend a little bit of time on is some navigation updates that you'll notice inside of Popdock. The team did quite a bit of work, like I had mentioned, with the Popdock UI. So you'll notice some navigation differences as people are working inside of the web application. Some of them and some of these are kind of highlights that are just make it easier for people to be informed of not only how much or what areas of Popdock contain information, but also easier tools to more effectively navigate between different pages. So the first thing that I pointed out here is breadcrumbs that are embedded throughout the application. What these breadcrumbs essentially allow you to do is you jump back and return to different pages that make up the breadcrumb. So for instance, you might be starting from a list of connectors and you go and edit one of the connectors, and from there you go to edit one of the lists. And then while you're on the edit list page, you finally land on the calculated field section where you go to create a new calculated field. Well, now once you're done with creating that calculated field, you now can use the breadcrumb that gets created to essentially jump back to any of those pages within the chain. So rather than having to go back to previous page multiple times, I could easily jump back to my list of connectors as that page would be listed within the breadcrumb. Another thing that you're going to notice is there's record counts on all of the tabs inside of Popdock. The record counts identify the number of resources that are being displayed when you select a particular item in the web application. So for example, on like an edit list page, the fields tab will have a record count, and it essentially is outlining how many fields are inside of the fields tab. So you don't necessarily have to click into any of the tabs to get an idea of what areas of Popdock contain data. And then the last thing that I highlighted here is the edit button on all lists. Now, this was a feature that was previously available on custom lists, but essentially what it allows you to do is when you're viewing a list inside of the Popdock web application, there's now an edit button and in kind of the header of the list that you can click. And by clicking it, it's going to actually open up a new browser tab for you, and it'll bring you to the edit list page for whichever list you are viewing. So this becomes a very easy tool to navigate between viewing data and then editing a list if you're making any modifications or customizations to that list. The last area of the release that I wanted to spend a little bit of time on is the new app help or inline help that's built into the product. This is a pretty big effort from the team to get this set up. But we essentially now have a context sensitive help throughout the web application. So you can now navigate to really any page inside of Popdock, and you'll typically find either like a read more or a tooltip hyperlink on the page. And by clicking that, it's going to actually open up a help sidebar that is populated with help documentation that is relevant to whichever page you're on. So rather than having to jump to our website to get our help, customers now have access to help documentation without ever having to leave the Popdock web application. Alternatively, another way that you can access the help is there's a question mark icon in the upper right corner of the Popdock web application that you can click on. And when you click on that, it also opens up the help sidebar with and from once that help sidebar is opened up, it's basically broken down into a couple of different sections. So there's a table of contents that you'll be welcomed with, where you can search through through help articles by clicking the different subgroups. There's also a section that's specifically there for Popdock script reference. So if you have people using calculated fields, specifically Popdock script, there's now a reference guide that gives you information on what all of the formulas in our Popdock script do. And then the last section of that is also, there's a search area which will allow users to essentially search through our help documentation to locate really any article that they'd be looking for to assist them while working through the web application. And one thing to note about the help sidebar is completely resizable, so you can actually expand it, make and minimize it. I think it goes all the way to half of your screen. So it really becomes a nice tool that allows customers to be working in the web application and have a help article right on the same page, so they aren't using having to jump to multiple monitors or again multiple tabs to get additional assistance while they're working inside of the web application. So again, these are just a couple of areas that I wanted to highlight. I'd recommend spending some time, especially when it comes to the security, just familiarizing yourself with the different user roles and the different connector roles, so that as you're helping customers get their Popdock accounts set up, you're aware of some of the roles that are available so that you can assist them more effectively. And again, really recommend using that Teams functionality when we do start talking about security. So that's all for me. I guess I'm now going to pass it over to Alicia, who's going to talk a little bit about upcoming trainings and events that eOne's going to be hosting or attending.
Awesome, thanks, Tyler. So yeah, the first half of the year, we have some great events coming up. Of course, towards the mid part of the year, that's where we'll see a lot of you at Directions and Dynamics Con, etc. But for the beginning of the year, we do have some integration roadshow boot camps coming up. So essentially what these are great for your sales, pre-sales, solution architect people, or anybody essentially that is responsible for making your customers' processes better. So these integration roadshows are a day and a half, and we dive deep into what the eOne iPaaS platform is, where it fits in within your customers' integration needs, whether that's virtual integration or physical integration between different systems. And your team will essentially be able to identify what those different scenarios are, which ones fit best for your customers' needs. And it'll also give you a reason to go back to your customers and learn more about what systems they're using and how they can make those processes more efficient. The other events that we'll be at this year, or the beginning of the year, we will be at 2 Zendesk conferences, both in Vegas. Seems like there's going to be a lot of events in Vegas this year. The first one, the SKO, that's going to be for meeting the Zendesk team and meeting with partners. So if you are a Zendesk partner, we'd love to meet up with you there. The other one, the second one in March, that one will be Zendesk Relate, and that's where we'd love to meet you and your customers there. For webinars coming up, we have a really fun webinar. We actually just presented this one yesterday, and we had a lot of attendees attend this. So essentially what this is it's learning how to position our platform again. It's in a way similar to the roadshow that we do, probably a lot more condensed. So this is about an hour and a half, 2-hour webinar. So if you're a salesperson or pre-salesperson or a consultant and need to brush up on what does eOne do? How do I position eOne? What are the things I need to look for in my customers' scenarios where eOne would fit? So it's teaching you the ability to identify those keywords and questions to ask your customers, to identify those integration needs, those virtual integration needs, where they need that ad hoc reporting, kind of going back to what Rod was talking about earlier. So being able to identify all those things in a condensed version. So 2-hour session on a webinar. We decided to do it again in January since we had really, really high attendance on yesterday's call. So if you haven't done so yet and need a refresher on the tools, wanting to learn how to better use them, position them with your customers. Attend the webinar on the 21st of January from 8 to 10, and that's Central Time. We're 1500 to 1700 CEST for our European people. The last thing that we have for events coming up are our 2025 boot camps. We have a whole variety of different boot camps, once again, for those implementing or using the software, just learning how to use that better. These can also be attended by your customers. So if you as a partner don't have time to train them on our tools, feel free to send them to these trainings as well. So we'll have our Popdock boot camps. We do those usually once a month. We have integration boot camps with Smart Connect around multiple ERPs, and these we also teach, agnostic type tips. So it's not necessarily just with that ERP. So if you want to learn more about integrations in general, feel free to attend one of those Smart Connect boot camps. And along the topic of Ethan, when he was talking about migrations, we will also have migration boot camps coming up in the early part of the year, so you can learn to complete those customer migrations off of GP, NAV, SQL, files, whatever ERP system to whatever ERP system you're looking to migrate them to a whole lot faster. So lots of really good stuff coming up there. And of course, I'm going to touch on that very last one quick, the Popdock self-paced training. When your team or somebody sets up Popdock for the first time, they actually get access to a self-paced training. You as partners also have your own NFR keys or IUR keys that you have access to, and we can also get you access to that self-paced training. So you can step your way through, learn how to use Popdock. So that is it for the events and the boot camps that we have coming up. I just want to thank everybody once again for continuing to be partners of ours. We truly appreciate all your support. This has been a year full of changes for eOne, and I think as for partners as well. And we are really looking forward to next year, going a lot deeper into our partner base and different ERPs this coming year as well. So looking forward to that. I think we'll see if we have any questions. Oh, is the recording from yesterday's webinar available? I'm going to need Katie to answer that, I think.
I think it's recorded. I'm going to double check that, and Dave, we can circle back with you on that opportunity to get a hold of that. Or if you would like it, you can feel free to email sales@eonesolutions.com or reach out on our website. We can get it to you that way if there's someone else who wants access to it as well.
Great. I'm not seeing any other questions. Anybody else on my team have any questions that they saw come through that I'm missing? If not, thank you once again for attending our Q4 2025 Partner All Hands call. We look forward to the new year. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and we'll see everybody next year. Take care.